Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy voy a compartir una otra parte de este libro, uno de mis favoritos, Discourse on Method and the Meditations on René Descartes. Hoy lo voy a leer Discurso número 3. So today I'm going to share with you a reading from one of my favourite books, Descartes' Discourse on the Method and Meditations. Today I'm going to read you Discourse number 3. I hope you enjoy it. I may say, I think the ending of this is particularly interesting. Number 3. In the same way as it is not sufficient, before beginning to rebuild the house in which one lives, only to pull it down and to provide material and architects, or oneself to try one's hand at architecture, and moreover to have drawn the plan carefully, but one must also provide oneself with some other accommodation in which to be lodged conveniently while the work is going on. So also, in order that I might not remain irresolute in my actions during the time that my reason would oblige me to be so in my judgments, and so that I would not cease to live from that time forward as happily as I could, I formed a provisional moral code which consisted of only 3 or 4 maxims which I am willing to disclose. The first was to obey the laws and customs of my country, firmly preserving the religion into which God was good enough to have instructed me from childhood, and governing myself in all other matters according to the most moderate opinions and those furthest from excess, commonly accepted in practice by the most prudent people with whom I should have to live. For beginning already to discount my own opinions because I intended to submit them all to examination, I was assured I could not do better than to follow those of the most prudent. And although there may be perhaps as sensible people among the Persians or the Chinese as among ourselves, it seemed to me that the most useful would be to adapt my behaviour to that of those with whom I would have to live, and that to know which were truly their opinions, I should take notice rather of what they practiced than of what they said, not only because in the corruption of our manners there are few people who are willing to say all they believe, but also because many do not themselves know what they believe. For the action of thought by which one believes a thing being different from that by which one knows that one believes it, they often exist the one without the other. And among many opinions equally accepted, I would choose only the most moderate, as these are always the most easily applicable in practice and very likely the best, all excess being usually bad. Moreover, I would wander far less from the true path if I should prove to have taken the wrong opinion than if, having chosen one of the extremes, it were the other extreme that I ought to have followed. In particular, I put among the excesses all the promises by which some part of one's freedom is taken away. Not that I disapprove laws which, to counteract the inconstancy of weak minds, permit, when one has some pious design, or in the case of the security of commerce, a merely secular design, that one should make vows or contracts which oblige one to persevere in them. But because I saw in the world nothing which remained always in the same state, and as, in my own particular case, I promised myself to make my judgments more and more perfect and not to make them worse, I would have thought I had committed a grave error against reason if, because I had once approved something, I felt obliged to consider it good later, when it had perhaps ceased to be good, or I had ceased to consider it so. My second maxim was to be as firm and resolute in my actions as I could, and to follow no less constantly the most doubtful opinions, once I had determined on them, than I would if they were very assured, imitating in this travellers who, finding themselves astray in some forest, must not wander, turning now this way, now that, and even less stop in one place, but must walk always as straight as they can in a given direction, and not change direction for weak reasons, even though it was perhaps only chance in the first place which made them choose it. For by this means, if they do not go exactly where they wish to go, they will arrive at least somewhere in the end where they will very likely be better off than in the middle of a forest. And so it is that the actions of life, often brooking no delay, it is a certain truth that when we are powerless to discern the truest opinions, we must follow the most probable. And although we see no more probability in some than in others, we must nevertheless settle on some and consider them afterwards no longer as being doubtful, insofar as they relate to practice, but as very true and very certain, because the reason which has caused us to settle upon them is itself such. And this was capable from then on of freeing me from all the repentance and remorse which habitually agitate the consciences of those weak and wavering minds, which allow themselves to proceed with vacillation to practice as being good things which they judge afterwards to be bad. My third maxim was to try always to conquer myself rather than fortune, and to change my desires rather than the order of the world, and generally to accustom myself to believing that there is nothing entirely in our power except our thoughts, so that after we have done our best regarding things external to us, everything in which we do not succeed is for us absolutely impossible. And this alone seemed to me to be sufficient to prevent me from desiring anything in the future that I could not obtain, and therefore to make me contented. For our will naturally tending only to wish for things which our understanding tells it are in some way attainable, it is certain that if we consider all external goods as being equally beyond our power, we should have no more regret for lacking those which seem to be due to us by birth, when we are deprived of them without any fault of our part, than we have not for possessing the kingdom of China or Mexico, and thus making, as the saying is, a virtue of necessity. We shall no more wish to be well when we are ill, or to be free when we are in prison, than we do now to have bodies made of some material as incorruptible as diamonds, or wings to fly like birds. But I admit that long practice and often repeated meditation are necessary to accustom oneself to look at everything in this way. And I think it is in this that lies the secret of those philosophers who in former times were able to escape the sway of fortune, and in spite of suffering and poverty, to rival their gods in happiness. For occupied ceaselessly in considering the limits laid on them by nature, they convinced themselves so perfectly that nothing was in their power except their thoughts, and this alone was enough to stop them having any longing for other things, and they possessed their thoughts so absolutely that they had thereby some reason to consider themselves richer, more powerful, freer and happier than any other men, who, if not having this philosophy, however favoured by nature and fortune they might be, never have this control over the desires of their will. Finally, to conclude this code of morals, I thought it advisable to examine minutely the diverse occupations of men in this life, to try to choose the best, and without wishing to comment on the occupations of others, I thought I could do no better than to continue in my present one. That is to say, to devote all my life to the cultivation of my reason, and to progress as much as possible in the knowledge of truth, following the method I have prescribed for myself. I had experienced such extreme satisfaction since beginning to make use of this method that I did not think it possible to experience gentler or more innocent joys in this life. And discovering daily by its means truths that seemed of some importance and generally unknown to other men, the satisfaction I obtained from it so filled my mind that nothing else mattered to me. Besides, the three foregoing maxims were based only on the design I had continued to learn. For God having given each of us some light of reason to discern true from false, I could not have believed I ought to content myself for one moment with the opinions of others, if I had not intended to use my own judgment to examine them in due course, and I would not have been able to avoid having scruples about following them if I had not hoped to lose no opportunity thereby of finding better ones if such existed. And finally, I would not have been able to limit my desires or to be happy if I had not followed a path by which, thinking I was certain of acquiring all knowledge of which I was capable, I thought also that I was certain by the same means of acquiring all the true goods that would ever be in my power. Since our will tends neither to follow nor to flee anything except insofar as our understanding represents it as good or bad, it suffices to judge well in order to act well, and to judge to the best of one's ability in order also to do one's best. That is to say, in order to acquire all the virtues and with them all the other goods one is capable of acquiring, and when one is sure that this situation exists, one cannot fail to be happy. Having thus provided myself with these maxims, and having put them on one side along with the truths of faith, which have always held first place in my belief, I judged that, as for the rest of my opinions, I was free to undertake to divest myself of them. And inasmuch as I hoped to be able to complete this task by frequenting other men rather than by remaining any longer shut up in the stove-heated room in which I had had all these thoughts, winter was not yet fully over before I took to travelling again. And through all the 9 years which followed, I did nothing but wander here and there in the world, trying to be spectator rather than actor in all the comedies which were being played there, and reflecting particularly in each matter on which might render it doubtful and give occasion for error. I rooted out from my mind during this time all the errors which had introduced themselves into it hitherto. Not that in so doing I imitated the sceptics who doubt only for doubting's sake and affect to be always undecided, for, on the contrary, my whole plan had for its aim assurance and the rejection of shifting ground and sand in order to find rock or clay. This object I achieved well enough, it seems to me, inasmuch as, trying to discover the falseness or uncertainty of the propositions I examined, not with weak guesses, but with clear and assured reasonings, I found none so doubtful that I could not draw from it some sufficiently certain conclusion, even if this might not be other than that the proposition contained nothing certain. And, as in knocking down an old house, one usually reserves the demolished material to be used for building a new one. So in destroying all those of my opinions that I judged to be ill-founded, I made various observations and acquired several experiences which have served me since to establish more certain ones. And in addition, I continued to practice the method I had laid down for myself, for besides taking care to conduct all my thoughts according to its rules, I put some time aside now and again, which I used in particular to exercise this method in the solution of mathematical difficulties, or even in that of some others which I could make almost like mathematical problems by separating them from all the principles of the other sciences, which I did not find solid enough, as you will see I have done in the case of several which are explained in this volume. And so, without living outwardly any differently from those who, having no occupation other than to lead an agreeable and innocent life, are careful not to confuse pleasures and vices, and who, to enjoy their leisure without boredom, indulge in all honourable distractions, I continue to follow my plan and to progress in the knowledge of truth, perhaps more than if I had done nothing but read books or spent my time in the company of men of letters. However, these 9 years passed before I had as yet made any definite judgment regarding the difficulties which the learned are accustomed to debate, or had begun to seek the basis of any philosophy more certain than the vulgar. And the example of many excellent minds which, having had this plan previously, did not appear to me to have succeeded, made me think it was so difficult that I would not have dared to undertake it so early if I had not seen that some people were already putting about the rumour that I had completed my task. I cannot say on what they based this opinion, and if I contributed anything towards this rumour by anything I said, it must have been by admitting what I did not know, more naively than is usual among those who have studied a little, and also perhaps by displaying the reasons I had for doubting many things that others accepted as certain, rather than by boasting of any knowledge. But being proud enough not to want anyone to take me for something different from what I was, I thought I ought to try by all means to make myself worthy of the reputation I was being given. And it is exactly 8 years since this wish made me decide to leave all those places where I had acquaintances, and to withdraw here to a country where the long duration of the war has established such discipline that the armies maintained there seem to serve only to ensure that the fruits of peace are enjoyed with a maximum of security, and where, in the midst of a great crowd of busy people, more concerned with their own business than curious about that of others, without lacking any of the conveniences offered by the most populous cities, I have been able to live as solitary and withdrawn as I would in the most remote of deserts. There we go. So, hope you enjoyed that one. Déjame saber en los comentarios, como siempre. But for now, from Medellin, we'll say cheerio.